Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing Good Samaritan laws, which provide some limited immunity for being charged with a criminal offense for simple possession if a person calls in a drug overdose. Now, the police, we were talking in the last segment about the police have credited this law with an increase in calls for help because that's the policy outcome the law is designed to achieve. I mean, there's some skepticism about the whether that can be actually shown. But Kabir, you mentioned something interesting in the last segment about a lot of people who use drugs remain very fearful about calling these types of things in, just because I think there's probably a negative relationship with police. Is there anything you want to expand on about why people still may hesitate to call 911 if they witness a drug overdose, even with the immunity that this law is supposed to provide?
I think the history of treatment of individuals who are drug users and drug addicts contributes to the hesitance of those individuals to call the police. I mean, these are individuals that have a long history of victimization with the police, and only recently has society and the court, to a certain degree, acknowledged that these people are not criminals but suffer from actual addictions. I think it's going to take some time to repair that relationship that individuals have with the justice system, with the police, to make a law like this effective. Especially when you consider that once an individual calls the police and faces a risk of getting wrapped up in the system, once you're trapped in the system, it's difficult to then get out of the system, especially if you don't have the resources to hire a lawyer or you're somebody that doesn't have stable housing or whatnot. So the risk to that individual calling the police is still too high in their mind for them to take advantage of the protection provided by the Good Samaritan law.
I mean, especially when we consider the case of Wilson, which we're going to be discussing, where he called the police and nevertheless was charged, or not charged, but he was arrested for simple possession. But we're going to get to that. First, I want to expand on some of the policy reasons behind this. So, Lisa, how important? I mean, the fight against the opioid crisis and against addiction has many different facets to it, and I think that this is just one perhaps aspect to help stop this flood of overdoses that we're seeing across this country. How important do you think this law is in that overall approach?
Yeah, it's hard to say what its effect will be, but obviously the opioid crisis is a major social problem that requires multiple strategies on the part of the government. And so I applaud the government for bringing this in as some attempt to try to give protection to people. And it certainly is a known phenomenon that drug users may scatter in the event of an overdose as opposed to calling EMS and staying to help. And that's a real tragedy. Anything we can do to get people who are experiencing an overdose help is, I think, worthwhile. I guess the last thing I would say about the effectiveness of the law is that, of course, any law can only be effective in guiding human behavior if people know about it.
Hmm.
And it may be that this law isn't well enough publicized for people to even have it affect their behavior. So maybe one advantage of this case going to the Supreme Court of Canada is that the law will get more publicity, more people will know about the protections that they have under the Good Samaritan law.
So let's talk about this case going to the Supreme Court. RV Wilson. Wilson didn't scatter when he saw his friend overdosing. He did call 911. What can you tell me, Lisa, about the facts in the case?
So Wilson was part of a group of four. They were out in a truck. One of them lost consciousness. She was having an overdose after having taken fentanyl. And as you say, emergency services were called. EMS arrived first. The medical services arrived first. They were helping the person who was overdosing, and then the police arrived on the scene. And they arrested all four people, including the person who was overdosing, for simple possession of drugs because they found evidence of drugs around, not surprisingly in the circumstances. Then they did what's called a search incident to arrest, a search at the time of the arrest, as you said earlier. They searched the truck. They found more drugs. They found drug paraphernalia suggestive of trafficking, and they found guns. And then the accused and others were arrested in relation to those offenses. Ultimately, the accused was convicted at trial. of firearms offenses in relation to the guns found in the truck. And the case went up on appeal. The Saskatchewan Court of Appeal set aside the conviction and acquitted him. And that's the issue that's going to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, is whether that acquittal at the Court of Appeal level will stand.
Right. When we've got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to discuss the argument that the government made in this case. We'll be right back.